This is E&P Reports, a vodcast from editor and publisher. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And this episode sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide understand the need to accelerate its growth now. Plus, traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way. IQ Audience Plus is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers media companies to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income now with IQ Audience Plus. Visit townnews.com EP today to learn more. And greetings once again. I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine. If you're enjoying our weekly vodcast series, E&P Reports, and you're listening to the audio on whatever podcast channel you like, by all means, please subscribe. If you're watching the video version on YouTube, do me a favor, go right under the screen, click that subscribe button, smash the bell to the right, and you'll get an update each and every time we upload a new segment. We always open up with editor and publisher, the authoritative voice of news publishing. Since 1884, we might be able to make that claim, right? Been around for a long time, independent. But who is the authoritative voice of unpublishing? See, that's a word now. It's actually jargon that discusses and references a situation where you've put news up into the digital world and someone asks you to take it down. What do? What's your policy? Why is it up there in the first place? Well, I have the authoritative voice of unpublishing. Her name is Deborah Dwyer. She's a PhD candidate at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she's doing her entire thesis on this actual issue. And joining her on this segment of E&P Reports is Kathleen English, the chair of the Canadian Journalism Foundation, who's on her advisory board for this new unpublished entity, because Kathy has been dealing with this issue for years at the Toronto Star. This is a fascinating topic that you may see value in. It may actually be something else you don't want to worry about, but you might want to keep your eyes on. So let's explore the world of unpublishing on this segment of E&P Reports. I have two very, very smart people on today's E&P Reports. Both of you, I checked both of your backgrounds out. I'm going to make sure I don't make any grammatical mistakes today. But first of all, Deborah Dwyer. Deborah, do you prefer Deborah or Deb, or do you have any preference?
Deborah's great.
Deborah, you are a PhD, University of North Carolina, Canada, in Chapel Hill. Today we find you there. And Kathy English. You have been through many different newspaper companies in Canada. You are on the board or faculty of the Ryerson School of, you're a former member of the Ryerson School of Journalism, and you have a master's degree in Canadian history. This is what I find fascinating. Your thesis was on how family ownership in Canada was coming unplugged like it did here in the US. Am I correct?
Yeah. I looked at all the factors that made families who'd owned newspapers from the early 1900s, why they sold to chains. And as we know, this is an ongoing issue in the news business. There's hardly any families left.
And it's such a shame because correct me if I'm wrong, requires the kids to want to stay in the business, right? And it's hard today because they've got financial advisors saying, no, this is not where you want to be, right? And
exactly. There's
still a few out there, though. We keep having great interviews with great family ownerships that still have what I call ink in their veins. Does that make sense? Although it's mostly a digital world, but that's why we're here to talk. We're not here to talk about the print side of publishing. We're here today to talk about how the digital side of news publishing, which is just it's in its infancy if you think about it, guys, right? I mean, this all started only about 20 years ago. I put up one of the first US newspaper websites in Portland, Maine. And that was back in 1999. And now, just a couple decades later, everything's digital. But let's get into this whole idea of unpublishing. This is fascinating. And Deborah, you've put a lot of your time and energy into this. This is your baby, and this is why you just returned from working in Missouri, correct?
Correct. I've been working on this topic since 2016, when I returned from 25 years in the communications world to academia. And I was actually working at a newspaper at the time outside of the newsroom, but had actually worked with a lot of those people at a former newsroom. But anyway, I was close with the editor, and she was struggling with this issue at the time. And I had told her that I wanted to come back and do research on topics that would actually help her in the newsroom, that weren't just ivory tower, type topics. And this was one that was at the top of her list. And so I started chasing it. And here we are several years later. And actually, Kathy did one of the first industry forays into this research in 2009. And so I call her my unpublishing mother, because really she got me started, going down this line and introduced me to some people, and has really helped my research. So Kathy really started the conversation back in 2009.
Well, let me define what this is, because I was doing some research on it before this interview. Didn't want to waste your time. Here's what I found. Unpublishing, that is one word. I don't know if you can play it in Scrabble. It's a legal word. Is jargon for a set of complex issues surrounding requests from individuals to remove obscure or significantly alter the then accurate information that may no longer be accurate in the webosphere. I'm making up that word because it goes everywhere. Once we publish it, right, and we stick it out there on the internet, it's not like the print product, right? There's the print product off the press, there it goes. And then in the old days, 25 years ago, we archived that in a simple PDF or whatever format, right? We took a picture of that page and threw it up there. Now, the moment I publish anything on E&P, my authority on Google is so strong, within 2 hours, I'm #1 on Google News. And then that gets spit out everywhere and repeated. So let's assume, give me a scenario. If you don't, Deb or Kathy. Kathy, maybe we'll go, because you were doing some on the ground research with some newspapers. Kathy, give me a likely scenario where you put up a story and then a few years later, you got to reevaluate what you put up there.
Sure. Well, people come to news organizations seeking to have information removed from the internet and from the news site for many, many reasons. Some of them trivial. I have a whole category called romance gone wrong. Those stories where someone writes about the engagement or marriage of someone, and then it goes wrong, and 3 years later they want all evidence that romance ever happened scrubbed from the internet. But the most serious ones, and the ones that are very concerning, are those where someone has been charged with something. Police charge someone, and so it could be an insignificant, in the grand scheme of things, a drunk while driving, a marijuana charge, and 6 months, a year later, the charges are dropped or the person's acquitted, but the internet record that says that person was charged lives on forever. It's not surprising that those people come to news organizations. And I was the public editor of the Toronto Star for 13 years. So I was the person that fielded all of the requests to unpublish. And I will also move on and in a moment and tell you how we came to the word unpublished. But I would hear these people, hear their requests to make this news disappear. They didn't want future employers, future landlords, future, their children being able to Google their name and finding this information. That was technically true in that they'd been charged. And though we say that we subscribe to innocent until proven guilty society, that's just not the way it works for those people. People see that they've been charged and make assumptions about guilt.
Well, I mean, for example, if you could go back and check out a previous interview I did an interview with an interesting gentleman, fascinating man named Brewster Kale, who made you know who he is, right? Okay, so I see heads nodding. Brewster,
I want to hear this.
If you ever talked to this guy, he is just amazingly intelligent. He made millions and millions and millions of dollars years ago selling software in the infancy of the internet. But now he is running a nonprofit called archives.com. with one mission in mind, to have the entire human experience in one place. Think about that. And that's how I met him, because we had old issues of E&P in tubes from 3 owners ago that he got a held on. And now we have every issue of the global newspaper industry back to 1884, now available on archives.com. So even if I take it down now, Kathy, it ain't down. Am I right? Okay, like, am I right? Am I right, Deb? I mean, it's gone off into so many other places. How does this even possible, Deb?
Well, some news organizations say their responsibility ends at their front door.
There you go.
So, we might take it down, and we need to get into the terminology here in a minute about what take it down actually means. But because it doesn't mean, unfortunately, one of the topics I push a lot, and Kathy knows because she's on my advisory board for this project, is that the terms we use, she came up with some great terms back in 2009 when they were working on this project, but the way the phenomenon has morphed, they don't really work anymore because they're not expansive enough. But when we say take it down, a lot of times organizations mean we'll take it out of our CMS. Right?
Okay, that I get. But and we're going to get into, I want to get into your nuts and bolts in a moment, because I know there are a lot of editors listening right now saying, okay, give me the advice. What are the standards? But I don't want to get there. I want to stay at 20,000 feet and paint the picture on why this has become weird. In a lot of small towns, the newspaper archives, correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, are the history of the town. I mean, how many times have we read detective novels where people go into the newspaper and in the old days look at the microfilm? We are a record. And if you remove something that was actually maybe needed later in a lawsuit or investigative, where does this start and end? Because in a digital world now, I see both sides of that story. Kathy, am I right? Is this...
You are, and I did the study I did in 2009 was for the American Society of News Editors. I'm not even sure that organization still exists, but it was through a grant through the Excellence in Journalism Foundation, and this was at that point a relatively new issue for editors and newsrooms. All of a sudden, we were having people come to us and asking us to remove things. And the way the word unpublishing came about, when I came into the job in 2007, I'd been in the newspaper industry for many, many years. And all of a sudden I was asking people to take down information that we published. And I was having dinner once with the public editor, the reader's editor of The Guardian. And we both were sort of lamenting, what are we going to do about all these requests? And between us at one point, and I'm not even sure which of us it was because there was wine involved, we said, it's almost like they're asking us to unpublish. At that point, we both kind of wrote columns coining the word unpublishing. And then when this opportunity to do a research project came along, I pitched the idea that how are editors across North America dealing with this question? Because we were flummoxed by it. We were trying to figure out what to do. How did it fit with our responsibility to the public record, to the fact that, people use the microfilm, used our records. Now they were using it online as the history of the community. We knew all that. So I did a survey of, I think, 107 editors at that point, and most of them expressed what you were saying now. I got things like, it's not our job to make history disappear. We can't unring the bell. We have a responsibility to the integrity of what we publish. So all of those issues loomed. I wrote a report sort of expressing that. But I think now, in looking back all these years later, I believe, and this goes to what we were talking about at the outset about the difference between newspapers and digital. I believe we were all looking at it as old-time newspaper people. This was 2007. The iPhone had barely taken over. We didn't all have a computer in our hand at that point. So that's why I'm so thrilled that Deborah is looking at this through the prism of now and how common these computers we carry around are, because we can't look at this in the way that we traditional newspaper people did. We need to to find the prism of now and the realities of the digital world.
All right. So before we get into, I want to get into the nuts and bolts, and I got 2 more minutes. I have this time, and then I'm going to because everybody wants to know, what are we doing today? What are the standards? But before we get there, let me interject one more fly in the soup, if I may. Okay. I came to the industry as an ad guy. I am totally on the business side. I came from radio and TV. I was a nerd in 1998. The Portland Press Herald pulled me away from a radio group and said, start our website. I said, what's a website? I mean, it was the infancy. And then I came through the industry doing advertising. Now, when I took over E&P, this is why I love you guys so much. You're much smarter than me. I told my editorial team in California, you're allowed to tell me to go to hell anytime you want. Protect the brand, because I'm going to beg you to take the whole front page and turn it into an ad. But that's how I got this thing turned around. So I'm now doing things called, wait for it now, I'm bringing up the fly, sponsored branded content. Every time I can, because it's working. I mean, if you go to Google right now and type in maximize reader revenue, the #1 issue facing our industry today is, can we get subscribers to pay? The #1 return on Google is actually sponsored content on E&P. Does that make this even worse of a situation, that more and more news brands who are publishing this stuff are blurring the lines a little and letting the advertising world enter their content? I can't believe I'm even bringing this up, because you may want to slap me silly. I see you nodding your head, Deb. So Deborah, you start first on that one.
Okay, you just brought up about 10 different issues that we can go down. But we're going to talk about advertising, I guess. First off, just advertising or native advertising, branded content.
Whatever you want to call it, native advertorial. There's a million names. Right.
Most news organizations that I speak to, and this is where, unfortunately, right now we're putting out fires from individuals, right, who contact us. And we're just trying to get through the day. Most of the time, we don't have enough resources in the newsroom. And so, people just want these to go away. What I have found is that advertising is an area where most people say they paid for it, we'll take it down, right? They paid for it. So same thing a lot of times, as trivial as it may seem, with something like a marriage announcement. Typically people will say, look, if they paid to put it up, then they can take it down. That could be problematic, right?
Yeah.
At some point. Now, but I also want to jump to advertising in general. You say you're an ad guy. Let me give you a situation that I've encountered in a newsroom. An ad guy like you comes and knocks on the editor's door and says,
daily.
Hey,
yes.
Hey, right? It used to be, hey, this advertiser is opening a new restaurant. Maybe it'd be a good feature, right?
Right.
Now it's knock, knock, knock. Hey, we're getting ready to close a deal on a $10,000 a month contract. Let's say big one, right? Unfortunately, we wrote 2 newspaper articles at one point about them failing their restaurant report card. Okay. They'll sign as long as you take those.
It goes down. I never thought of it that way. See, I was thinking in terms of a competing business coming along 5 years from now saying what that advertiser said was a lie. It was wrong. They're not #1 in this. They aren't this. They aren't that. And suddenly, lawyers, they just would go nuts on that kind of a thing. So now you're bringing up the other issue. Can you say to the newsroom, remove the past because my advertiser's pissed?
Correct. And you think about how hard up we are for revenue right now. That's a hard one, especially maybe it's not your ad person that comes to you. Maybe it's your publisher, right? And so now these are the types of new lines of editorial influence and potential corruption. I will go that far to say that can seep into our newsrooms, especially if we don't start really thinking about how this affects not just individuals, because a lot of people, especially editors that are just focused on their community paper, think about this as individuals who need a fresh start, that kind of thing. What about when it's the mayor's office? What about when it is your most major advertiser? What if it's the biggest healthcare, organization in your town? These are going to come from all types of entities, not just individuals. And one of the things, I'll throw it back to you, but one of the pieces of data I'll give you, I conducted last year a survey of 1,350 US adults, okay, nationwide. It's the only widespread survey that's been done of the public. We haven't really heard what the public thinks. We've heard a lot about what news organizations think now. Kathy's done that research, as have I. And you'd be surprised at what the public expects. For example, this is where it gets crazy. An individual asks for something to be taken down, right? One of the questions that I ask people is, would you expect to find a news article from 10 years ago about a crime that an individual, private individual, right, committed, but now they're running for public office?
There you go.
10 years later. 79% of respondents said they would expect to find that article. Also, 81% believe that news organizations ought to be following a set of standard guidelines. So when removing or altering things from their archives. So you can see how all of this gets so meshed up. Again, we're worried about individuals getting over their lives now, but we don't know the future value of information. And that's one of the terms that I'm really trying to push now. Let's don't think about this, is it newsworthy today? Let's think about, it's not a question of would you publish it today? It's a question of, does the information have value?
But if you think about it, it goes beyond the printed word in today's world. You've got these echo chambers of cable systems now where anchors are doing straight opinion, and they're ranting and raving on something. And, and I'm not picking sides here. I would say that
Right.
Joe Scarborough and Brian Kilmeade, both of those host morning shows on opposite sides of the spectrum. But what they sometimes say is in journalism. I mean, at least in a newspaper environment, we're supposed to say this is editorial and this is opinion, right? That's one of the reasons I love this one microcosm or whatever part of the industry. It's getting crazy out there because that stuff lives forever.
Well, and we have to be careful too, Mike, that we're saying like this isn't a print problem, it's a digital problem. It's also a print problem.
Yes.
Because so many organizations now place their print product online. So
Exactly.
that becomes a digital product, including a lot of organizations now are going back and digitizing their archives from decades ago and putting those online. Think about this. When somebody asks you to remove content, let's say you agree to do that, right? And you tell them this is one of the problems with it's taken down. That content also ran in your print newspaper. Are you going to go put a black box over the content in the PDF that's online?
Yeah, but so you don't, it gets worse than that. I don't own my archives.
Correct.
I didn't inherit the tubes when we did the purchase. I didn't think of, and they got lost because two companies went bankrupt. That's how they wound up over at some place in California. He owns that content now.
Right.
And I got 80 years of this stuff. I mean, I own the last 15 on my website, but all the stuff before that, I can't do anything to.
Well,
but they'll come after me.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, RJI, another group at Reynolds Journalism Institute, just published a fantastic report about digital archiving of news content. And they talked to like over 100 people in news organizations about it. And I'll tell you, you touch on something really critical. The first thing I now ask people who come to me for guidance on this is I ask them, are you archiving every bit of your digital content? 100% of your digital content? And to a one, nobody says yes.
Ah.
And so my question becomes, how do you stand on that moral high ground of we are the first draft of history, which you will read in a lot of unpublishing policies, and we don't believe in altering the news archive. However, what they don't say is our organization, and it's not the newsroom necessarily, our organization is putting no priority or resources into archiving that content. So those two things are at 100% odds.
They are just,
Right.
that's an oxymoron. It's on
Right.
steroids. All right,
It's
Kathy, you've been silent. Let's bring this to the ground. This conversation could go on for hours. This is so fascinating because it's just something we're so busy right now, just trying to survive and get through a pandemic and get good journalism out and keep our audiences. Now I got to worry about what the heck we put on the internet 10 years ago. Kathy, what you have doing here together, and it's not just you and Deb, there's a number of people involved in this, is you're putting together or trying to, I guess, cobble together standards. Am I right, Kathy? That we can all go to. So how does that work logistically?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's worth noting that the news industry overall has grappled with this for at least 14 years now. And through that time, individual news organizations, industry organizations have looked at it, and we still don't have a set of consistent, transparent standards that we can say to the communities, this is what it means. Within my own organization in Torstar, so I was the public editor of the 5 daily newspapers. We also, Torstar also owns 80 community newspapers, and we had dissension within our own ranks. That the community newspapers said, no, this is how we want to do it. The dailies said, no, this is what our policy says that we do. So, that was a microcosm for me of why the industry has grappled with this for so long. It is complex. For every point, there's a counterpoint. You kind of go, oh yeah, well, what about this? What about that? But I think that the work that Deborah is doing right now is the best attempt I've seen to try and grapple with the complexities and come up with some standards that all those newsrooms around North America and beyond are grappling with, to say, this makes sense. This makes sense. When people come to us asking us to remove content, here are all the things that we'll consider, and we're transparent about it. My original report was very, being the public editor, transparency, accountability, are core to what I believe is, imperative to trustworthy journalism. And to me, it was really important that we were consistent with the public, that we didn't take something down because the publisher's friend asked him to. At the same time, we penalize someone else by saying, nope, we don't unpublish. So a set of transparent standards just matters so much, and making sure your community knows what they are and understands why they are.
Where are these standards being compiled now? I want to see them. I'm being the editor now. And how do I contribute to them if I have ideas? Where's that forum, Deborah? Where do we find that?
So I launched a website, and again, with Kathy and many other advisory board members' guidance, at unpublishingthenews.com.
Unpublishingthenews.com.
And if you go there, you will see that there is a section for resources, and there's a policy repository. Right now, we have 60 plus policies that are linked there with a little intro about each one. And so you can see kind of across the board what's happening in the industry. However, we ought to clarify that a lot of people are not transparent about their guidelines. They won't publish them. I've talked to editor after editor that says, we don't want to write these down because we don't want to be held accountable to them.
Of course.
And even Kathy, you can back me up on this, one of my projects for RJI was going to be producing a 1-page transparency report that news organizations could put on their website, just like Google does in the EU, right, for the right to erasure in their GDPR legislation, where people can ask that search engines remove searches only based on their name, which we probably won't have time to get into, but what we do in the US is actually much more significant than that. But anyway, Kathy, Alan Sunderland, who's the head of the Organization of News Ombudsmen and Standards Editors now, 2 people who have been with me since the jump and are very engaged in this conversation, said, Deborah, nobody's going to do it. Nobody is going to put a 1-pager like Google has, very basic data about how many requests we receive, kind of maybe what categories they are in, and how many we approved. Nobody's going to do it. Kathy, am I?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of that is because so much of this is still arbitrary. So, at the Toronto Star, we had a policy that basically says we do not unpublish except in rare circumstances. Rare circumstances being legal reasons. If the lawyer says take that down, you take it down. And then I think it said in rare, either compassionate or humane reasons. So there's a lot of subjectivity in that. So as public editor, when people came to me asking to have content removed, it was my job to say, no, we don't do it. And I would be transparent. I would show them the policy. I think we also have a line in there saying, there is an appeal process. Well, the appeal process was myself, the editor-in-chief, the newsroom lawyer, and usually the editor involved in the story, looking at the request to unpublish and considering all the reasons that people were saying. I mean, and we had people saying, I can't find a job. My psychiatrist says I'm at risk of suicide. I can't live with this. So it was important to us that no one person be the newsroom censor and decide what stays and what goes. But I can tell you, like 90% of the time, everyone voted to hold the line and not take it down. There were very rare reasons. So what you were asking, Deborah, I think were sort of some of the reasons why they might choose to take something down. And it was really hard to put that into words.
Right.
Say, well, if your psychiatrist says you're suicidal, we might take it down. Or, how do you prove that you can't find a job? So, all of this became problematic. But for me, as a person who had to communicate with these persons, it's also really troubling because I feel sometimes like I carry all their stories in my heart and soul in terms of worrying, are they really suicidal? Is this ruining their lives? And is that what news should do? Should the ongoing publication of news ruin people's lives? But at the same time, going back to some of the points, Mike, and we recognize there's that historical record. There's the fact that happened. So again, it takes us back to the complexities.
Well, and right now, the public does say, based on my research, 2/3 say if journalists have to choose between minimizing harm to the people involved and protecting the public's right to know, which of course we can get into, do we have the right to know that somebody ran a stoplight or, was arrested for low-level marijuana charge? But they do believe that we ought to be protecting the public's right to know. Obviously, if you're involved, you want things down. If it's your neighbor, you don't.
Exactly. I was going to say, but if it's me, there's a different story behind that.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating that publications would rather not even publish their policy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Just leave it alone. It's like, it reminds me of when Hearst was digging for gold. We don't want to be a state. I can break every rule I want. You're actually in a place now where they would rather not even mention that they have a policy in hopes that it just doesn't happen. Is that what I'm hearing?
Think about this. Well, but I have it on good authority. Even major news organizations that say they don't do. Some of them will even track things down in like LexisNexis, right, to try to get it down, or contact the Internet Archive. I mean, you don't know what's been removed from these systems, right?
So I got to bring this home. We'll start with Kathy. Kathy, I just appointed you vice president in charge of public policy, content of Gannett. You got the job. Come on down to DC, big plush office, save us from this world.
I'm in.
What policy? No, come on. I'm putting you on the spot. What policy would you implement if you were the largest news publisher now in the United States of America? What would you do?
Well, I think I would generally have a policy that reflects the public's right to know.
Okay.
That would recognize that there are times when there are reasons to remove content from the archive, but there has to be a consideration of the ongoing value of the public interest value. We talk a lot in Canadian newspapers about the public interest. What's the public interest here? So recognizing the public interest. I would also be very clear that it's not one person that makes this decision. That it always should be a committee, and that there should be an attempt to quantify some of the reasons. I'm not there with those yet, but we should say why, what we do. We should be very, very transparent and accountable to people. But I will also say, and this is something I've been saying from the outset, I believe so much of this happens a step before, when we consider what we publish in the first place. And increasingly, I mean, you have communities all across the US that publish the daily police blotter, campus newspapers that publish a daily police blotter, that never follow up to see what happened to those people. And again, in that, through the prism of Black Lives Matter and this racial reckoning that's occurring through journalism, and finally, I think we need to think about the harm that is done to people of color who have been wrongly charged by police. This also feeds into this whole discussion of, are police our expert source, and do we just publish what they say without question? So these two things are intersecting, but it goes back to a point I've been saying for 14 years. We need to think more about the ongoing value of what we publish right at the outset. It shouldn't be published just because it fills space or just because police said.
Yeah, and we have some information about that on the website, actually, because pre-publication policies is something I'm working on with a newsroom in Missouri actually right now to develop, because it gets into a lot of things, sensitive content, vulnerable populations like children that are named now, and maybe, there's not a lot of value in naming them, those kind of things. So pre-publication is key.
that was going to be my idea, Kathy. I would have the smartest advisory board in the world listed on the website. So if it ever got to litigation, a judge would go, wait a second, these guys know journalism better than me. They know the industry. I mean, you have a judge, you have a couple PhDs, professors, local people in each market that contribute to it. So if the issue happens, we say we're not living in some, we're not doing this internally. We have the public trust in mind as well as the individuals, almost in a committee sense. To me, that, I'm no lawyer, but I think that would keep you out of any litigation. I do believe also in what Deborah just said, what you do up front matters, right? This is it. Be very, very careful now, because what you're doing today, you may regret 10 years, right? And that's
we had cases where we would, be interviewing, stories on young women who were talking about sexual assaults on campus, and the reporters had them on their record using their name. And I would sort of say, are they aware that this name will live on the internet forever? And this became a part of another issue in journalism, informed consent. Do people truly know when they give to a reporter, to a news organization, that their name can live on in that context on the internet forever? So make sure people know that at the outset. And of course, reporters don't want to do that because they don't want to use a source, but it's better than that person coming a year later and saying, I don't want people Googling my name and finding out I was the girl who was sexually assaulted on campus.
What's the website again, Deborah? If someone wants to start contributing to this, making comments on it, go ahead.
Yep. Unpublishingthenews.com. There's an editors forum where you can start discussions on various topics. The policy repository is there. There's a form to submit yours. I'm looking for any kind of collaboration or, people who are interested in the topic, who want to try to further our efforts and get to a point where we do have very, very basic standards across the industry.
And is this funded by Reynolds? I mean, who is funding this whole project? Where's the money coming from?
They were. There is no funding now. So
we
this
need to get
is me. Yeah, this is me. I mean, frankly, probably we'll need to look for some funding, especially because I'm getting a lot of contacts from news organizations who want some consulting help. But obviously most newsrooms don't have the cash to do that. So maybe we'll find a funder.
You never know. There's a lot of money flying around right now. And Kathy, fascinating that you were part of this before Deborah was even thinking about this. You saw this coming years ago. This because of your position at the Star, right? I mean, you were at Tour Star. Mm-hmm. You were
being an editor. People brought these issues to me day after day, and as I said, as someone who started in the newspaper industry in the late 70s, this was a brand new thing connected to digital journalism, and again, I think that those of us who looked at it early looked at it through the prism of newspapers, and Deborah is just taking it so far through her work in really recognizing that this is a digital news issue, and we need to come to terms with this.
Which means also broadcast, think about radio, think about podcasts, Mike.
I want to thank both of you for your valuable time. This is eye-opening. Just another thing we got to consider. And congratulations, Deborah, on doing your thesis work during a pandemic.
Thank you.
You were trapped in Missouri for the whole, not that being in Missouri is bad.
It's not, but the Institute was closed for part of the time. So it was a challenge, but it was great. And we'll continue this work. The website's going to continue to grow and evolve. So, good things are coming.
All right, both of you take care and thanks again.
Thank you so much.